We're Ruth and Roger Rasmussen. We moved here to Valdosta about 5 years ago, and then I discovered the radio station 3ABN, and with that I got in touch with the pastor of the church and had him come and visit us, and he wanted me to share my testimony because it's a little bit unusual, and I wrote it down, so I'm going to be reading it so I won't lose track of where I'm going. How I got saved. My father, a self-declared atheist, worked at the University of Florida in Gainesville. We never went to church. When my parents divorced when I was 7, my mother moved to Tampa, Florida, which was a long way from Gainesville in those days. Most people had no cars, roads were few and narrow, and phone calls were expensive, so I rarely heard from my dad and only saw him about half an hour every 2 to 3 years. I should mention that this was before the Second World War. Since there was no child support back then, my mother worked in the daytime and attended night school to learn bookkeeping. My brother stayed after school to practice every sport in its season. He delivered newspapers every morning before school and had to go to bed early every night so that he could get up early in the mornings. So I was very lonely and sad all the time. I rode streetcars to and from school morning and afternoon. As I let myself into our small apartment every afternoon, I turned on this small heater to heat up a cold apartment, and I would lay down on the rug in front of the heater and cry myself to sleep for loneliness. When some of my friends' mothers fussed at them for having unmade bedclothes on the floor, I would say to myself, "You lucky girls, you have your mother at home to fuss at you." Later, when I was 14 and in the 7th grade, I asked my homeroom teacher, "Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going when we die?" My homeroom teacher, Miss Freese, said, "Honey, I can't answer those questions for you." Shortly after that, a girlfriend asked me if I would come with her to church Sunday to help her fill a pew. She had promised to try to fill a pew because a special speaker was coming. So I went. But the sermon didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know who God was. I didn't know that He had created the world. I didn't know I was a sinner and that Jesus, God's Son, had died for my sins. After the sermon, there was an invitation, but I didn't know what that meant. And to my surprise, my girlfriend went forward. And I thought to myself, I've heard about people going forward. I wonder what that means. Many people did not have cars back then in 1948. So as my friend and I were walking home from church that morning, she told me that she had gotten saved the previous year, but had not gotten baptized. She had gotten away from the Lord, and this morning she came back to the Lord, rededicated her life, and was going to be baptized that night. Then she turned to me and said excitedly, "Ruth, why don't you come and be baptized with me?" Instantly, I heard a voice yelling in my spirit, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You've got to do something first." But I didn't know what or why. All afternoon, all that I could hear or think was, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to do something first." That night, my friend and I walked back to church. When the sermon was over, the pastor asked for everyone who was going to be baptized to come forward and change clothes to be ready for the baptism right after the invitation, so my friend left. That left me sitting on the aisle seat right near the back of the large church next to my friend's grown brother and his wife and their children. My friend's mother and father had died, and she and her brother lived with their older brother and his family. As the invitation began, I was standing next to the older brother. At one point, he leaned over and spoke softly to me, "Honey, why don't you just turn loose?" I stepped out of the aisle, and my first inclination must have been to run to the front, because my first thought was, I'm not going to run, but I did. When I got to the front of the church, between the 2 front benches, 2 things suddenly happened to me that I had no idea would happen. I felt a huge load lift from my shoulders that I had not realized was there. Years later, after I learned my doctrine, I realized that what I had felt was when God moved in and dwelt within me. I'm sorry, I always do this when I tell it. I also realized that after my parents' divorce, I must have felt like an orphan, because all 5 of my girlfriends in high school were all orphans. In the next few weeks, I saw that I was no longer lonely. I would unlock my front door, get my Bible, and sit and read avidly for hours because I was amazed that I could understand the Bible. Because a few years earlier, my aunt had said that if I would attend church for 1 month with a friend, she would give me a Bible. She did, but I found I couldn't understand it. It was about that time that I heard the offer of a Bible course on Daniel and Revelation on a St. Petersburg radio station. It was a seventh-day Bible course, and taking it grounded me biblically for the rest of my life, beginning me on a thirst to know the whole Bible and giving me the knowledge that we were living in the last days before the second coming of Christ.